We are going into an uncharted territory, a new segment here on Politik, the Deep State Files.
The Deep State Files.
On this week's Deep State Files, we're going to be discussing how in 1965, the Indonesian government was overthrown by their military and started a mass murder campaign that essentially left upwards of 1.5 million Indonesians dead in the interest of quote-unquote eradicating communism within their country. And as of 2017, the newly declassified CIA dispatches essentially show that the U.S. not only was aware that a genocide was occurring, but we also had an active hand in it.
That doesn't sound right to me.
You're right, I must have fucked this up. I'll start the show now.
Start the show.
Realpolitik is politics that are coercive, immoral, or Machiavellian.
Mr. McCarthy, move down and have you no sense of decency, sir?
Begins with one word, realpolitik.
All right, welcome to Realpolitik. I'm your host, Paul Holden. I am joined by my good friend, my fellow warrior on the search for truth,
And
Chris,
justice.
the plumber. And justice.
And the American
And all
way.
that is... Ooh, I don't know about that, considering today's topic, but...
Well, I would argue this is not the American way. The real America. You gotta remember, there's always been two Americas.
The establishment and everyone else?
Well, there's been like the good America, right? The Langston
Yeah.
Hughes America. But there's never been there's also been some very awful America, and this is a great little look into bad America.
Yeah. And this is an example of America at its worst. And it is something that I think most people are not familiar with for a couple of reasons. Number one, most of this information and the CIA's part in the events that happened in Indonesia in 1965 were hidden, and they had been classified for decades, and they were recently released about 3 years ago. And then the other piece of it is that Indonesia, after this coup, aligned itself with the West, namely the United States, during the Cold War. So we don't talk bad about our friends, and no one ever decided to start discussing these mass killings and what the implications are, besides to say that they were great, and that it was an effective policy that got rid of the evil
It's
communism
always,
from Indonesia.
if they're communists, we can do whatever we want to them. Kind of like terrorists now. Just this, communist is the 1950s through 90s version of terrorist. We kind of did a hybrid version in the Balkans. There were some terrorism. There was some kind of weird form. They were Eastern European, right? So that's automatically communist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it just goes to show what we are able to do to people when we utterly dehumanize them. And you can think what you want about communism as an ideological system. It does not mean that those people should be fucking slaughtered. And it's a truly despicable and evil thing that we did.
Let's go. Should we go head first or feet first?
We're going to go feet first. We're just going to dabble in and just talk about Indonesia generally and kind of set the stage, because I'm assuming that a lot of our listeners may not be incredibly familiar with Indonesia as a country. But
so we're going to be like the American paratrooper.
Yes, that is us right now, jumping out of the plane.
Give it to us. Make it hot.
Let's drop it. So Indonesia, it's a former Dutch colony. So they were ruled by the Dutch for about 500 years. It's a series of like thousands of islands out off the coast of China. And they really were very separate cultures and very sectarian, but the Dutch kind of just drew a big circle around all the islands and said that this is one thing. So that's kind of classic colonialism for you. The Indonesians were kind of quote-unquote liberated by the Japanese under Hirohito during World War II. So they kicked the Dutch out after the Japanese invaded, and then the Japanese occupied Indonesia.
Yeah, I was gonna say they kind of traded one awful imperialism for a more Asian, but just almost as equally awful form of imperialism.
Yeah, and that's basically most of the stories I have heard and the interviews that I've read. It was, oh, this is great. Yes, they're still occupiers, but at least they're Asian. And then they start interacting with the Japanese, and they're like, oh, these guys are assholes.
These guys,
But
I don't know, it's like, yeah, they're raping and murdering and killing us under the Dutch, and then
Yeah.
the Japanese come, and they're raping, murdering, and killing us.
Yeah, there's about a week of setup, and then the raping and murdering happens, including capturing a lot of Indonesian women and forcing them into sex slavery. So it was definitely not a great situation.
They did that in Indonesia too.
They did that in Indonesia as well. Yeah.
Good God, dude.
Yeah, they forced them to be comfort
The
women. as they say.
Japanese really loved their sex slavery.
It's weird. I don't know the history of it, but it's just a common
to be fair,
theme.
Southern Americans loved their sex slavery too. I mean, Thomas Jefferson,
true.
a president, loved him some sex slavery.
Yeah. I guess it's just
It's just
it
a
goes
form
back
of
to
power over a
dehumanization.
person.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They are literally helpless.
And that's basically what was happening in Indonesia. The one tiny little silver lining that was occurring while the Japanese occupied Indonesia was that one of the rebel leaders, his name was Sukarno, was pushing for Indonesian independence. And the Japanese, unlike the Dutch, were allowing for some sort of Indonesian nationalism to occur. So, a pride in being Indonesian and kind of being a collective group as opposed to just being a series of fractured islands. So once the Japanese surrendered to the United States, Sukarno was like, oh shit, this is our moment, and declared Indonesian independent state. The Dutch did not like that, so the Dutch tried to recolonize Indonesia, and then Indonesia just kicked them the fuck out. They were not having it, which is a bit of a badass move.
When did that happen? Was that like late 40s, early 50s?
Yeah, it was immediately after World War II.
So this is like right before the Korean War.
Yeah, exactly.
Southeast Asians were starting to flex a little bit.
Mm-hmm. They
We're
were.
like, we don't want to be colonial powers anymore. This is about the same time as it's happening in Africa, though. There's like a general liberation movement going across the United States, across the world.
Yeah, which actually leads to Indonesia and Sukarno's eventual downfall. Is tying into that African movement as well. So by the 50s, Sukarno was president overseeing a parliamentary democracy. And there were three major political groups. It was the communists, and their party was the PKI. The nationalists, which was essentially the military and the army. And then the Muslims had their own political party. And the PKI started to rise through the parliamentary process. They're winning a lot of elections.
Just to kind of give a little bit of extrapolation out of this, Indonesia is one of the largest, or maybe the largest Muslim country, right?
I believe it is the largest. It's the fourth largest country in terms of population back then and now.
Oh, then it's definitely the largest Muslim population.
Which is also interesting how we never talk about them when they are huge. But I don't know.
Well, they're pretty friendly to the West these days, and this Jakarta method may have something to do with that.
I think it definitely will. So the PKI, aka the communists, were a unarmed political party. It's like the Democrats or the Republicans today, right? So it wasn't, the Chinese Reds with a military, or the Soviets had the Red Army. They were unarmed. They were simply running for elections in a parliament, and they were doing well.
And it's important to stress that because a lot of revolutionary movements at the time, I mean, take the Black Panthers, for instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could argue that was an armed party, right? And this was something that was pretty common, and there was always kind of the People's Liberation Army or something like that.
Yeah, in China. And that was the armed arm of the party. They had the guns.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
That it goes hand in hand with the party, and so that the Nationalist Party had control over the military is an important point to stress.
Yeah, and the other big piece too is that it's often kind of construed in Western thought that the Soviets had control over all of these various communist parties. They did not. This was someone who picked up Marx and thought a lot of it was good ideas, and they were trying to have a communist government, but through democracy and not through a violent revolution. So it was a completely different way of thinking than the Soviets thought. In a lot of ways, the Soviets didn't really support it because they didn't think that countries like Indonesia were industrialized enough to have a revolution
And
or
just
to be armed.
Just on that same point, it's funny going back and looking at the conversations between Mao and the different Soviet Union leaders. It starts with Stalin and goes until Mao died. I think he saw like 3 or 4 different Russian leaders. And so, they had no control over Mao.
None.
They had none.
They told Mao to stand down. They told him to work with the capitalists because there's no other way that China could industrialize.
Right.
Mao was doing his own thing.
Yeah.
He didn't give a shit.
He didn't give a shit about what the Soviets said. And I think that was, there was their strategic benefits. Did the Soviet Union have more than a lot of these industrializing countries, like Cuba, for instance? Absolutely. But as far as, anything more significant than weapons and maybe some manufacturing help, what could the Soviet Union really give to any of these countries that they couldn't get elsewhere?
Yeah, exactly. And because the Soviet Union was the second world. They started in 1917. It was a bunch of farmers and a couple rich-ass czars who were all crooked, and
most of them you wouldn't even consider farmers, right? They were serfs.
So it was not some great evil empire. They did not have the infrastructure to, cause revolutions across the world.
They were pretty evil.
We'll table that. So
you know what I mean? Like killing millions of people in the Ukraine just by starving them to death because you wanted to collectivize the whole entire country. It's a little evil.
No, and I'm not saying it's not, but the scope and ability of them to...
Well, we needed a boogeyman in the U.S.
Yeah, we needed a boogeyman. They just couldn't do what we pretended like they could do.
The Jakarta method needs a boogeyman. Well, we were doing this to communists.
Yeah, exactly. So continuing on with a little background history. So the PKI, the communists, began to rise in the parliamentary process, and eventually Indonesia had the third largest communist party in the world behind China and the Soviet Union. That said, they were still only 1/3 of the country. There was 2 other major parties. But what Sukarno, the president, started to do is he started to organize with other countries in Asia and other countries in Africa. And in 1955, he organized the Boudon Conference. It was basically the third world coming together across Asia and Africa to support each other, to support each other's economic interests, and with the stated goal of resisting imperialism.
Yeah, Paul, and let me just break in here real quick. Because a lot of times I think when people think of the idea of the third world, they think poor, agricultural, subsistence farming, things along that nature. But what third world actually means is non-aligned countries to the Soviet Union, which was the second world, and the United States was the first world. So a lot of Western Europe would be a part of the first world, right? Poland and the Warsaw Pact would be a part of the second world. And then you had a whole bunch of countries in Central America, Africa, Southeast Asia that were not a part of either of these blocks, right? Were either unstrategic for whatever reason, or just were like, we don't really want to play these power politics international games. I think even India was a part of these talks, right?
Mm-hmm. I believe so. Yeah, they were definitely in the group, and I mean, you're right. It was them saying we're not going to be on either side, and at the time, it was still thought to be possible to kind of play both sides. Like, why can't I be friendly with the U.S. and the Soviet Union? Let me do my own thing. I'm not trying to fuck with anyone. which was kind of what Indonesia was trying to do in a lot of ways. They just didn't want to be fucked with in return, you know?
Romania was particularly good at playing the Soviets versus the Americans. Ceausescu was quite adept at, if you give me something, I'll be on your team. Hey, if you give me something, I'll be on your team, playing both sides.
Yeah. And Sukarno was not quite as skilled as that. He was very anti-imperialism, which made the United States pretty angry. And in 1958, the CIA attempted its first coup of Sukarno's regime by taking a group of rebels, training them up, giving them weapons, giving them funding, and even giving them an air force to attack Sukarno with. And in 58, they led the coup and even had CIA operatives flying the bombers over Indonesian cities to drop bombs on the cities. And the reason why this was found out was because one of their agents, his name was Alan Pope, crashed his B-26 bomber and was captured by the Indonesian military. And it was basically shown to the world that the U.S. was running this coup in Indonesia to try and like kill the communists, which was a big embarrassment to the CIA, and they had to pull out of it, and it ultimately led to the collapse of the coup.
Jesus Christ. Can you imagine? It's hard to even, I mean, I guess it is kind of easy to imagine done similar stuff like that. If a CIA agent was actually found in a bomber these days, I mean, of course they would never do it. They got drones and, all kinds of other crazy stuff. Assassination attempts, and I'm sure they've learned to be a little bit more covert. But it would have been fascinating to be in the United States when this is making international news.
Yeah, because not only were we assisting with the coup, offering training and supplies, we were active participants in flying the bombers. It's not subtle.
Yeah, because those bombs were American bombs, right?
Yeah, and we are bombing a democracy. This was a elected leader running elected parliament.
Right.
And we're like, fuck you. You don't get to do that. So after the coup, Sukarno started what he called guided democracy in 1959. So that's basically a concept that he just made up after he met with Mao Zedong in China. So he goes to China and he's like, oh, wow, they are, industrializing way quicker than we are. And a big part of that reason is because, my parliament has all this bickering between the three parties, and everyone over here is just listening to Mao Zedong. So, like, we need more of an autocratic leadership in Indonesia if we're going to ever get things done and try to, catch up with the West. So his idea was to create a guided democracy where he was the autocratic leader of the nation. He would have a parliament, and it would be broken up with members of the three parties that he would assign. And then on the, village municipal level, people just got to reign their own affairs, which was the big concern for them. Your village gets to run as your village wants it. You have leaders there. They can come to a consensus on how everything is ran, usually amongst the elders. And then on a national scale, he saw himself as the person who would be directing, where resources are going, where the infrastructure is being built, and trying to drive this development that he wanted to see for Indonesia. So
I was gonna say, keep going. I'm fascinated, dude. I know the story, and it's just still mind-boggling.
It's quite insane. So by the 1960s,
I was like, we're not even at the worst of it yet.
We're not even at the bad part. So by the 1960s, the U.S. thought that Sukarno was veering too far to the left, quite angry at the fact that Indonesia had an aggressive foreign policy towards the Dutch in New Guinea.
What part gave that away? The communist part?
I think that was probably it, yeah. So he started...
Listen, Sukarno, we know you said you were a communist, but you're really starting to get a little too left for us.
You're getting a little too commie.
We thought it was cute at first, but now the communist part, you're like a real red.
And the United States was actually starting to get a little worried because this is the height of the Cold War. They were trying to stop what they considered the domino effect, which anyone who took, a U.S. history class and knows about Vietnam knows of this. But basically it's, one place goes communist and the next place goes communist. And before you know it, we're all, speaking Russian was how they thought about this. So we started with, some outright interventions, namely
Russian's
Korea.
tough too. Like
It's hard.
I'm sure English is technically more difficult, but trying to learn Russian sucked.
Yeah.
And their alphabet looks funny.
It looks really stupid, and it also
It's
just
a
sounds weird
funny
and harsh.
looking alphabet. Like, I've always appreciated kind of Sanskrit type and Arabic, but Russian, it's close enough to Latin alphabet and just far enough away. Some of those just look like squiggle lines.
Yeah. You gotta hate it, man. You gotta hate it.
They got like a big R that's backwards. It's stupid. It's a
Yeah.
dumb alphabet.
But this is a great
And
example.
you can
though,
tell Putin
of-
I said that, dude. Dumb alphabet.
I'll send him a copy of this. I think he listens. Actually, he might be a Patreon subscriber.
He's definitely. I tell you what, the KGB is at least listening.
Oh, they have to be. I know the
They're
CIA
taking
is.
notes. They're taking
Yeah.
notes. They used a couple of our ideas as memes for the
They have.
Twitter bots.
If there's something I've learned through digging through the CIA,
We're giving them a lot of
unclassified
good
archives,
stuff, man. A lot of great ideas. A lot of big brain material.
If there's
Go
one
back
thing
to
I've
the
learned
Jakarta
through,
method.
all right, fuck it. I can't even make my comment.
I'm sure it was super funny.
I hate you. Indonesia, 1965. The 30th of September movement happens. It's called the G30S, and it actually happened on the 1st of September, so I don't know why the fuck they called it that. But it was a group of rebels who assassinated 6 Indonesian military generals. The President
Holy
Sukarno...
shit.
Yeah, they just fucking slaughtered them. President Sukarno openly disavowed this rebellion. They said that they were in support of Sukarno and trying to defend him, but he said, if you were defending me, why would you assassinate my top generals? And the origins of it at the time were actually really unknown. There was no clear political power behind it, and no one really understood why the hell someone would go and kill these 6 generals. And there was just no evidence to support really much at all. But a man named Suharto, who was an Indonesian military leader, he said that the PKI were behind the coup plot. He was formerly in charge of the reserve military, and he marched his men into the square that these rebels had taken over and where they had killed the generals, and they just gave up without any resistance, which is a little sketchy in of itself. These guys kind of pop up out of nowhere. They
The
kill a couple of
PKI
generals.
were the communists, right?
Yeah, the PKI were the communists. So these G30S guys just show up, kill 6 generals, and then give up without a fight. But what this allowed Suharto to do is say that the communists were finally staging their violent revolution and trying to overthrow the government.
Right.
So at this time, the U.S. was told that the military was planning a military coup. And the army was actually going to the various Western embassies and telling them face to face, like, hey, we don't know exactly when we're going to do this, but this is going to happen. This is part of the declassified CIA dispatches. And Suharto began to fulfill this promise that he made to the U.S. Embassy and sent troops across Jakarta, and within 4 days, he had taken control of the entire country. He just had men everywhere. And he started to spread false information that the communists were behind this. The CIA was also supplying Suharto with the communications infrastructure because, like I said, these are thousands of islands, and they don't have a way to spread messages quickly. So the CIA just gave them the fucking way and gave them the radios that they did not have so they could communicate with each other.
Dude, you got to get your propaganda out somehow. I mean, that's basic 101, coup attempts.
And while all this was happening, the U.S. Embassy was also telling the general that China was in league with the PKI and helping to plan this coup that was nationwide.
China!
Yeah, and at the time, the CIA and the embassy knew that not only did the PKI have nothing to do with the coup, but that also China damn well had nothing to do with it. But they were spreading these lies anyways.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've already lied about assassinating generals. Why not? Yeah, this is an easy one, right?
Yeah.
This is This isn't, as many easy lies as you can get away with. What's China going to, does China have the ability to talk against Indonesia at this moment in time? And they didn't have radios. They didn't have radios. How are they going to know China wasn't involved?
Which is basically exactly what was happening. So this is when the Indonesian military, being led by this general, started rounding up PKI members, which was a easy enough thing to do because the PKI was functioning as a completely legal party in the country. It wasn't like their identities were hidden. They were registered, right? 10,000 members of the PKI were rounded up and arrested. They also started training anti-communist youth to round these individuals up as well. And
hold up, I want to skirt back for a second and just kind of defend the Indonesians at the time because I was making fun that they needed radios to be told that China was involved, but Americans believe that Saddam Hussein had nuclear warheads and was the reason why 9/11 happened. So yeah, you can get a people to believe a false narrative that we're now a couple $1 trillion in debt because of.
Well, and that's the thing is that all you have to do is take advantage of
just
high
gotta
emotions.
say it loud enough and have the right people say it, right?
And people need to be upset enough. So a tragic event like 9/11 happens, and it's pretty easy to point that anger in a particular
The assassination of 6 generals.
Yeah. And you tell people it's the communists.
That's a traumatic event, especially in a country like Indonesia, no doubt, who was a democracy. And those were probably some, everybody knew those generals, right? Or at least almost everyone knew those generals.
Yeah, and even if you don't necessarily know who they are, they're your generals, right?
Right.
And
yeah. That's true.
And if you're a nationalist, or if you're part of the Muslim party, the Igama, you are likely concerned about the communists because you see, what happened in the USSR or what happened in China. And you think, oh, well, this could be a violent revolution. Maybe they are armed. I mean, these other communists are. So, maybe they're all just the same.
That's a fair point, dude. Communists are rarely kind to Muslim minorities.
Yeah.
The Russians and South Russia.
So these 10,000 PKI members are rounded up and immediately executed, right? There's no trial. They are just killed. This is where we find out right after this, the U.S. government was asking the Indonesian military what they're going to do beyond the current killings of PKI officials. They were essentially saying internally that just killing these PKI officials wasn't enough and that they needed to push the Indonesians to go further and to completely eradicate any hint of communism within their country. And that it was in the United States' geopolitical interests because if communism is allowed to take hold, what's that going to do? It's going to push out Western companies. It's going to push out Western influence. And they're going to lose control of the region, which they were fighting tooth and nail to keep. So they were actively promoting these to not only continue, but to go much, much further. And they were, the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta was telling the U.S. government that they needed to start supplying aid, more communications, more arms, and additional covert ops to the Indonesians to support the coming purge.
Let's pump the brakes real quick because I got kind of a strategic question on the United States. What were some of the big reasons why Indonesia was so important to the United States? I mean, I get the part where it probably is a pretty good naval base, right? Kind of like the Philippines, big islands in the southeast. Kind of good to be there for China, kind of good to be there for Pakistan in the Middle East. Probably a lot of shipping goes through there. I guess I'm starting to answer my questions. But were there resources that the Americans wanted their dirty mitts on?
Yeah, so at the time, the U.S. Embassy and the CIA and the U.S. government were most concerned about foreign oil companies being forced out of Indonesia.
Does Indonesia have a lot of oil?
They did, yeah. So on top of that, they also had
until
nickel,
we sucked it dry.
Nickel, copper, bauxite mines as well.
Dude, we really are just internationally just an awful, awful actor.
we are terrible. We are literally terrible.
And we've been like really horrible for. I mean, but Eisenhower warned us about this,
Yeah.
right? This is probably right after he leaves. He's probably like, y'all, we got a military industrial intelligence complex developing. We really got to think about this.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of this was during the LBJ administration as well. So after JFK was assassinated, JFK had actually traveled to Indonesia and a lot of the third world and had a
Another
decent
assassination, you say?
Another assassination.
That's
but he had a decent
interesting.
view of these groups and had an understanding of, and I'm going to say decent relatively speaking to other people at the time. He understood that they saw America as imperialists and understood the sentiment of them wanting to be in charge of their own country and be able to, have the same sort of ideology that we do where we're, in charge of our future, right? So
it's amazing.
It clicked, at least with him.
It's amazing what a bipolar mentality in international relations rots. I mean, just think about the Americans didn't have a space program, and 10 years later we're on the moon. Imagine if we had that kind of ingenuity and drive these days. There's people with no internet in America. There is people with a lack of great health care. There's people with lead in their pipes. We're still killing, police are still killing Americans. And we can't figure any of this stuff out. We can't fix any of this. And we went to the moon in 10 years with, we didn't have any space program. We didn't have, we had to go get Germans to make rockets for us. We had to go say, oh yes, Mr. Nazi, please come help us make some rockets. Mr. Former Nazi.
The Moon Man on the cover of Time magazines that was said to be the one that got us to the moon because he created the Saturn V rocket, cover of Time, former Nazi.
Former Nazi.
Huntsville, Alabama, full of Nazis.
Full of German Nazis.
It's still a very German place to this day.
Yeah, dude. A lot of houses with Haus in Huntsville, Alabama.
A lot of schnitzel. Get your schnitzel there.
To be fair, schnitzel is very good.
Yeah, but full of Nazis. We didn't give a shit.
And what is it, dude? I like those little wheat things that it's like Spätzle or something like that. It's delicious.
So good, man.
Love Spätzle.
All right, gonna skirt this back in.
Skirt!
Skirt! So, the murders were not stopping was the message that the U.S. gave to the Indonesian military. So, they quickly began to spread across the country and across the islands. And the military, which was not big enough to actually commit this atrocity by themselves, started training civilians who were sympathetic to the nationalists. And they were given weapons, and they formed local militias with the purpose of taking out communists and communist sympathizers within their region.
Do you think they took out ads in the newspaper for that? I mean, sure, you got to get some sympathy. Like, is it like Indonesian supremacist movements?
I think you just know what's happening at this point. And you just show up to the right meeting at the village. It's like, hey, you want to go kill some
membership dues and something like this? You have to pay membership dues.
You just show up. You just show up with a sickle and you are in.
You think you have to? You definitely have to memorize some words on a page, no doubt. Some kind of like salute, some kind of pledge of allegiance, huh?
Well, and it really depends on the group as well. So the nationalists who were aligning with the army,
definitely pledging to the state, right?
Pledging to the state, but the Muslim party, the Agama, were seeing this as more
prayer, right? They're definitely praying.
Well, and they saw it as eradicating the godless communists, the infidels, was how they stated it. And according to CIA dispatches, the widespread slaughter that was taking place was, quote unquote, akin to a holy war, as the Muslim population just started slaughtering people that they thought may have communist sympathies. And on top of that, like you were saying, the local newspapers were in cahoots with the military as well. They would force these alleged communists to come to their offices. They would interview them. beat them, torture them, and then they would change whatever answers they gave to just make them sound terrible, and to make them sound like part of this plot that was utterly
Kangaroo court.
non-existent.
It's a kangaroo court.
And then right after these interviews, they were taken away and executed. At first in the streets and by the rivers, and then eventually they had to move to more remote areas.
Thanks for ending my joke in slaughter.
That's how this story ends. It's not a good story.
Thanks for... It was a bad joke, all right? It technically was a kangaroo court.
It was a kangaroo court. I mean, that's an appropriate application of the term. If anything, the only misappropriation is that it wasn't even really a fucking court. At least a kangaroo court pretends to have some sort of authority. This was just random people slaughtering other people. And the term PKI and communist was turning into an excuse to just round up anyone to the left of the Nationalist Party, which could be, I don't know, someone who's fucking moderate, or anyone that you don't like. And they also started burning down entire villages and killing women, children, and the men there.
Yeah, pretty awful.
Pretty
terrible.
awful. Yeah. And these executions were becoming increasingly brutal as time went on. So guns actually were not very commonly used. Most of the murder weapons were makeshift. It was, bamboo sticks with nails in them. It was sickles. It was knives. It was rocks. It was boards.
We've heard this story recently, haven't we?
Huh?
India and China.
Oh, yeah. No, very, very true. Similar dynamic there of just beating the shit out of each other. The only difference is
But recently
that,
the Indians have said you can use a gun if you absolutely have to.
if you need to use a gun, you can. The only difference is that the majority of these communists were unarmed and actually went to their deaths rather peacefully. They didn't really fight back. I think they knew that there wasn't much of a chance. It became to get increasingly brutal. Heads were impaled on spikes. There were scenes where communists were lined up against rivers, and one by one they would go down the line and slit their throats and throw them into the river, to the point where local officials started complaining because bodies were literally damming up their waterways.
That's awful. That is horrifying.
It is terrifying. There was one instance of, not to get too graphic here, so you can forward 15 seconds, but their genitalia was cut off and lined up along the road as a message to any other communists in the region, what's going to happen to you.
That's a serious what the fuck, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this all started with the CIA.
And this all started with the CIA. And the other important thing
probably
to note
taught
as well,
a lot of these people how to do this in the most brutal way possible.
Yeah, a lot of these military leaders who were going out and training both the rest of the Indonesian military and the local militias were trained in Kansas by the U.S. military in quote-unquote anti-insurgency techniques, which included executions, torture, and summary arrests, and just beating the shit out of your own population, essentially. So
helps
these
to
were techniques that
explain
we
why
taught them.
Kansas is so shitty.
Yeah, I think that's probably it, right? Fuck Kansas.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody wrote a book, What's the Matter with Kansas?
What's the matter with Kansas? Bunch of dumbasses,
What's the matter with Kansas?
Yeah. And to throw just a little extra fucked up spice on this story, Chinese Indonesian citizens were being sought and killed with basically impunity, as all these others were.
Because Chinese were communists.
Yes, on purely racial grounds.
Good God.
The irony is that none of these Chinese Indonesians were communists. It was well known, and the CIA knew this as well, that the PKI had virtually no ethnic Chinese as members.
Dude,
because
you know
they
what?
were super racist.
You know what? No wonder Hitler and his higher command thought that the Americans would eventually ally themselves with Nazi Germany over the communists. I mean, this is the reason why, dude. Hitler saw this part of us, right? He saw this part of America that was just like, oh, God, they are awful. They will do some absolutely heinous shit.
No, and Hitler wasn't wrong for thinking that. In 1941, Senator Harry S. Truman, who would later become president, said, if we see that Germany is winning the war, we ought to help Russia. And if Russia is winning, we ought to help Germany, and in that way, let them kill as many as possible. That's a direct quote.
Brutal, dude.
Brutal.
And he was a president.
President of the United States.
He was a president, dude.
Yeah.
You know what, though? Again, it's a bipolar world.
Yep.
You know? We're either going to be the winners or the losers. So everything goes. Even when we're the winners, anything goes. Because no one can tell us what to do.
No one can tell us what to do, and we can hide the history as well, which is what we did here.
I was scrolling through Reddit, dude. Somebody brought up Abu Ghraib. I had forgotten about Abu Ghraib and how awful that was.
Mm-hmm. But we did it, man. We did it, and we keep doing shit.
And that
Maybe
wasn't
not to
even
this
killing
extent,
anyone, dude. That was just like psychological / sexual torture.
Yeah.
We are cutting people's genitalia off and putting people's heads on spikes in Indonesia. Or at least helping the people doing it. And not just helping, actively helping. Dropping bombs on cities helping.
Yeah. And there's a couple important things here. Number one, the CIA had an intimate knowledge of the killing techniques being used, and we're also staying abreast of how they were adapting. When the rivers started to flood with bodies, the CIA was sending letters back to Washington explaining how the military wisened up and started taking these communists to rural areas and then killing them there, so that blood was not running through the streets because it was kind of disturbing the local population. They also
I would imagine just a little bit.
Yeah.
I would imagine blood running down your streets would be a little disturbing, and maybe the people in the area wouldn't like that.
Yeah. Just not the coolest thing to do. We also were very aware of the fact that the vast majority of people who were being slaughtered had no communist affiliations. It was turning into people just being fucking killed for no reason.
It was a purge.
It was a purge. Or because your cousin, had a friend who was PKI. So the whole village was burned.
Dude, any authoritarian regime needs a purge. It's got to happen. It's the most way to up the level of fear.
Yeah.
You don't know. You don't know why these people are getting killed. You know for a fact your neighbor wasn't a communist, right?
And
you know your neighbor, your family member. They weren't communists. They didn't even really have that left-leaning of sentiments, right? They didn't give a shit, right? They were into whatever. They didn't give a crap about politics. And this person just ended up killed with their head on a pike.
Yeah.
It's crazy, man. That's some scary stuff.
It's some scary stuff. And the propaganda was so effective because, think about this. If you were there at the time, and you don't have any internet, man. You know what I mean? You don't have any really communication systems. You just know what you're being told. And you're being told that there's this massive communist plot to murder everyone. So you have to murder the communists in turn. And it led to not only this propaganda that was strong enough to, brainwash the entire population into thinking that a lot of this was true. Not that all of them did, but a lot of people to this day still think that this is true. But it was so traumatic and so violent that it led to a silencing of the population. To this day, people will not talk about this. If you ask them what happened in 1965, a lot of the people who were there say nothing. Nothing happened. And they will refuse to speak about the slaughters that occurred in their villages that are well documented.
Well, another interesting thing, and we haven't really talked too much about this, but another one of the modus operandi, standard operating procedures, MOSOP. I'm on my acronyms. I know them. But one of the SOPs of the CIA, another acronym, thank you, Central Intelligence Agency this time, was paying off leaders, right? Like tribal village leaders. You just paid them off. This is you're our friend now. You really love America. And if you have your village elders, you have your town elders, you have the people that you respect and admire and listen to tell you, hey, the nationalists, the military, the USA, they're on our team. All these were infiltrated by communists. Who are you gonna believe? Who are you gonna believe? A lot of these places, they don't have TV. We know they don't have radio, and probably at the most a pretty basic local newspaper. You know, maybe a regional newspaper, and like a village would share one newspaper between the group of them. You know.
Yeah.
And by that point, it's been bought out and propagandized too.
There's a very good documentary on Prime that you can check out right now. It's called The Act of Killing, and in it they have two members of the death squads discuss what they did, and also ask them to reenact these killings on tape.
Were they Indonesians or CIA?
They're Indonesians. And one of the people that they interview was the head of a local newspaper who was talking about how he was working for the military at the time to spread this propaganda. There was no real source of truth here. My last little note here, upwards of 1.5 million people were killed, but no one really knows how many. People were being rounded up and put into concentration camps. Hundreds of thousands of people had to flee and were never able to return home to their country because, you know, their grandfather had been a member of the KPI or something like that. So for fear of being murdered, they stayed away for the rest of their lives. The CIA, as one of their dispatches, like I said, knowing full well that these were what is akin to genocidal executions, and I'm quoting directly here from the declassified documents, said that the Indonesians were seeking assurances of continued aid, and also said that we had provided them enough weapons for the next decade. So they were wanting equipment to build facilities for their armies instead. They also wanted B-25 bombers and B-26s, and we should give them what they want. The CIA also stated we should ask their military intelligence about their counterinsurgency methods, especially Phoenix-type operations. We could learn from them. Phoenix being the CIA program that was designed to identify and destroy Viet Cong through infiltration, torture, capture, interrogation, and assassination. They were doing so well in their genocide that we wanted to learn their techniques so that we could do it in Vietnam, was the stated goal of the CIA operatives in fucking Indonesia.
Dude, I would love to see the psychological profile of somebody that gets through the CIA. I mean, I'm sure a lot of like your analysts and, you know, on the ground people, like the staffers, right? The computer nerds, most of them are probably decent people, but like the people pulling the strings have got to all be genuine psychopaths.
Mm-hmm. It certainly seems like that from these dispatches, and if you'd like to check them out yourself, George Washington University has collected the most terrifying ones and has posted them on their FOIA archive with some annotations kind of explaining the situation around a lot of them, so you can definitely go check that out. Just to read them for yourself. It's, you know, just good little, you know, Sunday night reading. But overall, the United States and the West framed this as a Western victory against communism. The U.S. News and World Report ran a headline stating, "Indonesia, hope where there once was none." A oil man named H.L. Hunt, who would later get a ton of property rights in Indonesia, said that the ousting of Sukarno was the greatest victory for freedom since World War II. The New York Times ran multiple articles saying how great it was that these purges have occurred, and the Australian Prime Minister said, with 500,000 to 1 million communist sympathizers knocked off, I think it is safe to assume a reorientation has taken place, commending the actions.
No shame, baby.
No shame.
There ain't no shame up in their game.
The entire Western world
in fact, they about
applauded.
to lead the race. Oxycontin in my system, man. I'm feeling kind of strange.
Yeah. And I mean, the big debate, honestly, is whether or not this was a genocide. Genocide typically being the purge and destruction and murder and slaughter of a particular ethnic or religious group. So there are some historians who say, well, no, this was a mass murder because it was a political ideology. But I think it is also fair to say that this political ideology does come with ties of atheism, which is a particular religious group. And the Agama were waging war on what they saw. Well, the Agama were literally stating these are infidels, right? They're not part of our religious group and they need to be murdered and removed.
Mm.
And if you combo that with the slaughter of ethnic Chinese, I think there's a pretty fucking strong argument to be made that this is
I can get
genocide.
behind the ethnic Chinese for sure.
And honestly, man, I'm gonna be honest. I
Leftists.
think that
It's something else. It's something else. It's not genocide.
maybe we should expand the
bad.
fucking word. Maybe
It's
we
awful.
don't have a word strong enough. Like the term mass murder
It's
does
yeah,
not
it's
provoke the
thoughticide
same
or
emotion as genocide.
politicide or something like that. I mean, there should definitely be a word for it, and there probably is. We just don't know it, and it's probably not well known as compared to. But like genuinely killing a whole ethnic group is I would say at least frowned upon by most of the world.
I don't know, man.
Just for being
As an atheist, I find it terrifying that leftist atheists were rounded up and killed. Many of them on religious grounds.
Talk to gypsies right now, dude, over in Europe. You think they feel good?
That's supporting my argument, in my opinion.
One of the worst was a Romanian told me that him and his friends once burned down a gypsy house, and I was like, I don't know if you're lying to me right now, but even if you are, it's like an awful thing to tell somebody, and I hope we don't hang out ever again.
That is one of the more evil things I think I've heard.
Dude, gypsies have it rough, man. Like, Europe gets on to us. They treat Roma. I should be saying Roma.
The Roma, yeah.
They treat Roma awfully. Romani.
It's garbage. It's garbage. Well, to quickly summarize the story, not only was the CIA providing money, they provided $600,000 in today's USD directly to death squads. They knew exactly what was happening. They were documenting what was happening. They're also keeping lists of those who were murdered so they can make sure that all of the big PKI leaders were knocked off. And they also withheld.
Hey, Paul Holden, do you think that 600,000 was on a Senate budget somewhere?
Well, last thing, they also withheld clear intelligence that disproved the army's version of the coup as an attempted communist overthrow. They had evidence that it actually came from within the military. They kept that from both Indonesia and the international community, and they had the stated purpose also of keeping the media out of Indonesia so that people did not know what happened. And this is all according to declassified documents. To answer your question, Chris, it was definitely a line item somewhere.
Not in the budget we get to see.
Not the one we get to see, but I can tell you what, Congress knew it. And there's also multiple reports of congressmen and senators requesting updates on what was happening in Indonesia. So you can find
How's
those
that
as
politicide going over in Indonesia? I just have to know.
How's it going? Have we killed all of them yet?
Are
And
we
if we
still
killed all of
having
them,
issues with bodies that create a dam for rivers? Is that still an issue in Indonesia?
they were treating communism like cancer, where it's like, yeah, I got the big chunk of cancer, but let's just burn a shit ton of extra skin around it just to be safe. And that was an extra about 1.2 million people likely.
So yeah, the deep state could never really pull off a large conspiracy like this, huh?
They definitely did. They definitely did a good job. I mean, for decades, it was thought that the U.S. kind of had a passive involvement, or were mostly just there and didn't do anything to stop it. And it wasn't really revealed until the past couple of years that we were active participants in this. We trained a lot of these people, and we gave them the money and the supplies they needed, and we gave them so many weapons that they didn't know what to do with them.
This was the stepping stone. This is the pilot program for the CIA method. This is how we're going to do things in the future. Some of them will be more covert. Some of them are going to be way harder, and this was pretty hard for decades, to say that the CIA was involved in this.
Well, and
They have their hands in a whole lot of stuff. And like you said, $600,000 doesn't sound like a whole lot. But for a covert program that the American public didn't know about, that's enough, right? That's
yeah.
enough.
Look what Vietnam did to the American psyche, right? It was incredibly political. It was turbulent, and look what the CIA did in Indonesia. Like, it was awful. It was evil, and it was fucking effective. And this turned into what was called Operation Jakarta, or the Jakarta Method. And when I said the CIA was saying, oh, we need to learn from this and use it in our other operations, they did. They used it all over South America and used these exact same methods that were proven effective in Indonesia to overthrow 10 different governments in South America. Fucking 10. This became their thing.
Just in South America.
Just in South America. This
and
was their
Central
fucking
America.
thing.
And Central America.
And Central America. And this is not counting anything that was going on in Africa either, where they were also doing it. This was their thing.
And the rest of Southeast Asia.
Oh, yeah. And there was just the whole goddamn world, basically. The whole world was where we were doing this, except for, like, Europe and
Canada, dude.
And, yeah, Canada. We're cool.
We just bully Canada.
I love them. I want to move there one day. This makes me want to move there even more.
So, do I get an apology for
Fuck
all
you,
the
no.
Politik heads out there? We got to come up with a better name. Holden Bros.
Holden Bros. Whatever it is.
Shitbirds, dude. Let's just call them the shitbirds.
Bunch of shitbirds.
Just a bunch of shitbirds.
Yeah. Well, that was our first entry into the Deep State Files.
Deep State Files, dude.
Yeah.
So you're not going to give me my apology, are you?
No. Fuck you.
Nope. Shitheads, you listen to me. He argued for about a whole episode. CIA couldn't do anything like this.
I'm cutting this out. We're way over time, so we just won't be able to fit this in.
You're such a shithead. We had moments at the front end. Don't even lie. Get to what you've been consuming, butthole.
All right. What have you been consuming, Chris?
You're the shitbird. On Netflix, I watched The Five Bloods, a Spike Lee joint. It was phenomenal, dude. If you're a big fan of The Wire, you will see some of your favorites and a couple of throwbacks to The Wire. It was just, man, it was a really good movie about Vietnam vets who find some CIA gold and they go back to Vietnam to go collect it in their 60s. So very interesting, well worth the watch. Netflix, great job. Spike Lee, on point. Really, really good movie, and I think a lot of people will enjoy it.
Awesome, man. Well, the two things I'll recommend, one I've already mentioned, it's called The Act of Killing. It's a documentary on Prime right now that you can watch for free, and it is a very much on-the-ground kind of human-level view of the impact of the Indonesian mass murders in 1965. There's also a sequel to it. The Act of Killing is about the death squads. The sequel, The Look of Silence, is more focused on the families that the murders impacted. So both are free. You can check them both out. They're excellent films. I believe they were both Oscar nominated, if not won an Oscar. But yeah. Boom. Well, that's been the Deep State Files. This is Realpolitik. I am Paul Holden.
Yo, Chris the Plumber, dude.
Chris the Plumber. Hopefully we just fucking destroyed your day with this terrible story of what the United States has done in the world.
Dude, you're like the new Alex Jones talking about all this conspiracy BS, dude. None of this is real.
I wish that I was as insane as Alex Jones. I feel like I'd have a lot more fun in life.
We do need to start hawking, like, mineral supplements, though, that turn you orange.
Yes. They're full of lead, but, you'll live for a little bit.
Brought to you by Chris the Plumber.
The end.